So, good morning, everybody. I am Inspector Kim Jones, and I'm an Intelligence Manager with West Midlands Police. And also on the stage is Tori Starmer, and Tori is an Intelligence Analyst, also with West Midlands Police. And we are absolutely delighted to be here with you this morning to talk you through how West Midlands Police are using ArcGIS to reduce knife crime in the West Midlands. So, a little bit of context about our force area. West Midlands is the second largest police force in the country, second only after London's Metropolitan. And we have a population of 3 million people. Within that, we have 1 million households. West Midlands sits at the heart of the UK, and we protect 3 major cities. The first one being Birmingham, which I'm absolutely certain you've all worked out is where I'm from, and the second being Wolverhampton, and the third being Coventry. And we have 3 strategic priorities in West Midlands. We deliver a service for local people, so that's all about protecting the vulnerable, making certain that we bear down on violent offenders, and making certain that we're really visible in our community. The second is about engaged communities, and our mission there is to build trust and confidence. And the third is being an employer of choice, and that is working as one team. Isn't that right, Tori?
Yes, boss.
She has to say that. So, what does a typical year look like for us at West Midlands? So we're a very busy force, lots of demand through the front door. So we can anticipate to take over 800,000 emergency calls. That's when you may need us in that situation that you need to ring 999. Also 600,000 non-emergency calls. And you can contact us online because we're all super modern now, and you can come and talk to us online, and we'll have about 400,000 of those calls. Now, I'm certain there are some really budding mathematicians in the room. That equates to 1.8 million calls a year, which is 5,000 a day, so mega demand there. So in the operational space, we can expect to do 24,000 stop and search, attend 240,000 incidents, and from those we'll go on to record 340,000 crimes, and an arrest rate in West Mids of around 15%. So, taken at context, busy force, diverse area, lots of demand. Okay, so I'm absolutely certain that many of you in the audience will understand from the press that knife crime in our country is rising, and that rise is also being seen in the West Midlands. And the Office for National Statistics tells us that in the last decade, knife crime has doubled. And that knife-enabled crime is mostly being seen in metropolitan areas, the West Midlands being one of them. But what sits behind those statistics are lives, real lives of young people, and the communities that are devastated and left behind when one young person is killed. Now, what may surprise you is that 17.3% of knife crime offenders are aged between 10 and 17. Let me repeat that, that's 10 to 17. So we're actually talking here about children. And as a mum of 2 teenagers living in the region, this is like the real stuff that keeps me awake at night. When you take on top of that the West Mids area has got one of the highest populations of under 25 people, we start to see that we've got a lot of young people that are more exposed to being involved in knife crime. On top of that, the UK is seeing a rising school exclusion rate. So when our young people should be in school between the hours of 9 and 3 and have that protective safeguarding factor, for some of our children in our area, that is not happening. And we know from social media, many of our children in the area will tell us that carrying a knife now to them feels quite normalised. So you've got a really complex, very challenging problem in our region to deal with. But West Midlands have been able to reduce knife crime by 6%. And we have done that in 2 ways. Firstly, through hotspot policing, and secondly, through problem-orientated policing. Okay, so let's start off with hotspot policing. What does this mean? So it's identifying hotspots using ArcGIS, and we've had that tool now in our force for about the last 2 years. And it's been able to identify hotspots to ensure that we get our precious resource of our police constables and our PCSOs, which we don't have a huge amount of that resource. You'll know from the press that policing resources are tight, so it's making certain that we get that precious resource into our hotspots at the right place and the right time. Now, previous iterations of our hotspots without the use of ArcGIS has been a tedious task, and it's taken an awful lot of time and many departments' work to get that done. But Tori and Daisy, who down the front is my other analyst, you're not getting away with it, they tell me that using ArcGIS tools has really sped up this process, and they can do that now in under a week. So if you start thinking about that, we can get the hotspots identified quicker and start getting our officers out on the ground and getting that policing activity done. What's incredible about our hotspots is they only cover 2.2% of the geography of the force, but they equate to 19% of the knife crime that happens there. So when we follow this approach and we have our staff in the right place at the right time, we start getting a lot of bang for our buck and get the maximum use of our resource. Okay, so once we've identified our hotspots, it's really important then to go and get into that problem-orientated policing. And this is all about taking that deeper dive and starting to problem solve. And a fantastic example of that is our Operation Fearless team that you can see on the screen there. And they have started work at the beginning of the year in one of the hotspots, Erdington. And they have been focusing on reducing knife-enabled robbery, drug supply, antisocial behaviour, and a whole load of other things. And they have been following the SARA model. And the SARA model, if you don't know what that is scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. Now that scanning part is all about identifying what the problem is. The analysis part takes us into why do we think that's happening? Why do we think that knife crime is so prevalent in this hotspot? Then we go and respond, and we send our police officers out, and we get them responding and getting that tailored focused approach in that area. Then it's really important that we absolutely complete that cycle and go into the assessment phase, which is understanding, did we make an impact? I'm now going to hand over to Tori, who's going to take you through scanning and analysis.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tori, and you can probably tell from my accent I'm not quite from the heart of Birmingham, like Kim, but I do still have a slight twang. So the first section of the SARA model is the scanning section, which Kim has identified where we needed to understand what the problem within our Erdington area is. To do this, I used ArcGIS to map out those offences within our boundary, which you can see just directly behind me in green, and then use the Select by Location tool within ArcGIS to remove any unwanted offences that sat outside. From here, I was able to calculate that within this small area, and I do mean small, it is literally just a high street, offending in this area for 1 year costs the economy just under £7 million. Now that is staggering. From here, though, I wanted to get an understanding as to whether we had any clusters of offending within our area. And to do this, I used the average nearest neighbour summary tool within ArcGIS, which helps identify whether or not offending is either clustered, random, or dispersed. You'll see the report behind me that it actually identified that offending within the area was clustered, meaning that it was significant. But what does this actually mean? It meant that we did have patterns within this offending that we needed to begin to look into. So, whilst we already knew that this area was a hotspot, as Kim has identified through our hotspot policing, we needed to take a deeper dive into understanding, well, actually, from that hotspot, what hotspots sat within our hotspot. And to do this, I use the kernel density tool within ArcGIS, which helps identify where those clusters of offending are occurring. You'll see on the map behind me, they predominantly sit on or around our high street, which was to be expected. From here, though, I wanted to understand, well, actually, from those hotspots, which ones are deemed statistically significant. And to do this, I use the GI star tool within ArcGIS. And what this does is it breaks the area down into grid cells, and then it counts the amount of crime within each grid cell and compares them. And then from there, determines which ones are statistically significant. And it does this by generating a standardized Z-score. The Bonferroni correction was also upheld to reduce the likelihood of false positives. Some analysts in the room, you might know what the Bonferroni correction is, but for those of you that don't, it converts that Z-score into a p-value. So you'll see here we have a slightly different map, and we do have some grid cells that are highlighted in red, and those are the ones that had a p-value that was less than 0.001, deemed as statistically significant. As an analyst, this was a really key finding for us, as it meant that we were able to prioritise which hotspots should be targeted first, and it also allowed us to understand which ones weren't statistically significant. So, for example, you'll see at the top of the map there, using kernel density, we did have some hotspots. However, using GI star, we were able to differentiate and work out that they weren't statistically significant, and we should be targeting those other ones that had the red grid cells. So ArcGIS has actually given analysts here at West Midlands Police a completely new approach into not only identifying exactly where crime is taking place, but also where officers should be patrolling. The AC25 analytical tool within ArcGIS uses road data to attribute each individual crime to a road segment. It then uses the incident cumulative percentage to work out where our most crimogenic streets are. What is a crimogenic street? It is where crime is disproportionate in comparison to other roads. For Operation Fearless, I was able to identify that the top 50% of all crime within our area occurred on just 8.2% of roads. That's half of our crime on just 8.2% of roads. You'll also see on the map behind me, we have two distinct coloured lines, the first one being red and the second one being orange. And those red lines account for the top 25% of our crime, and the orange lines account for the further 25% of our crime. And this is really key and important for us here, as it also meant we were able to prioritise those red lines first through proactive police tactics such as safeguarding and police visibility, and then also be able to move on to the orange lines. So whilst the example given behind me is for all crime, you can actually break crimogenic streets down thematically and begin to look at certain types of offending. For example, knife crime. And this is key for us as it allows analysts to quickly identify the where crime is taking place and begin to look at the why. And this is when the analysis stage of the SARA model comes into place. This isn't a technique we've previously been able to achieve here at West Midlands Police, and it has received continuous positive feedback from not just the Operation Fearless team, but also neighbourhood teams and our senior leadership teams. So another new analytical technique that ArcGIS has provided us is the repeat near repeat classification tool. And this technique uses a series of distance and time values to either classify crimes as either originators, repeat, or near repeat, to help us identify a series of patterns within a certain type of offending. Now, this is something that we've always had strongly embedded here at West Midlands Police. However, using ArcGIS, we are able to identify patterns within a matter of minutes, not hours. The map behind me shows the potential robbery problems that we were having within our Erdington area. And you'll notice we do have some lines that connect those key offences together, where the thickest line indicates that those offences occurred within 0 to 1 day of each other, suggesting that there is potentially a pattern within this type of offencing. From there, I was then able to export out those offences that ArcGIS deemed as significant and begin to identify patterns regarding the motivation, the victims, and the suspects. And from there, I was then able to brief our Operation Fearless team so that they could carry out successful and meaningful arrests. This piece of work was really key and important for us, as a large proportion of our knife crime in West Midlands, and I'm sure across other forces in the UK, actually comes from knife-enabled robbery. So ArcGIS for us isn't just about mapping out offences to identify the who, the what, the where, and the when, but it actually allows us to begin to look at the why. As knife crime was a key issue we wanted to tackle for Operation Fearless, I generated a matrix heat chart to understand how weapons were being used in the area, which you can see behind me. One key finding was that a kitchen knife was most prominent when being carried but not used. And this was vital in our understanding, because it also coincides with our understanding that kitchen knives are the easiest type of knife for people to access, especially children. Kim?
Yes, Tori?
If I was to ask you how many kitchen knives you had in your home, would you be able to tell me?
No, not really off the top of my head, no.
So if one of your kids took a kitchen knife out onto the streets, you wouldn't be aware, would you?
No, that'd be quite difficult to understand if one had gone.
And this is why the work that we do is so important, as it allows us to be able to identify those patterns easier and put some more preventative measures in place. I'm now going to pass you back over to Kim, who's going to talk through the response section.
Thank you. Okay, so the response is all about our Operation Fearless team being out in that Erdington hotspot, and already we have already started to see, just from the beginning of this year, that hotspot, that high street, is already starting to have an impact on the community. We've had some incredible feedback. We've already seen 141 arrests, 158 stop and search, and a number of weapons, including those kitchen knives that Tori spoke about. So that analysis is starting to really work, because we're starting to be able to get that out to our frontline officers, and that's what they're starting to see already. But it isn't just about our policing activity in the Erdington High Street that's been really important. We've also been able to increase our collaboration with partners. And some partners that we've been able to work with here is our trading standards in the local authority and immigration. And as you can see from the slide that we've had, just in one location alone, we've seized over nearly 10,000 illegal cigarettes. And that picture there shows you some of that seizure, and that was behind a fake wall that was being stored in. We've taken a load more counterfeit goods and made arrests. But what's most important about this piece of work here is that work with immigration, because we've been able to safeguard quite a few people that have been human trafficked and exploited to work in those locations. Back to you, Tori.
Thank you. So the final section of the SARA model is the assessment section, where we will begin to evaluate, well, how effective have Operation Fearless been within our area? We're not quite there yet, as they are still carrying out their amazing work. However, we will be analysing whether offending levels have gone down, whether the cost of crime has gone down, fingers crossed. But then we will also be looking at hotspot reduction and hotspot displacement. ArcGIS for us allows easy access to rerun the data and saves us a significant amount of time. One tool that we will be using is the weighted displacement difference tool, which Ben and Phoebe will be running through with you shortly. However, it is a statistical test used to measure the effectiveness of place-based crime interventions. As well as this, our Operation Fearless team have just submitted their work for a Tilly Award. For those of you that don't know what a Tilly Award is, it is an award given to problem-oriented projects that have achieved a measurable success in tackling those issues faced by the police, partners, and the community.
Okay, so wrapping up, there they are again in all their glory with our Commissioner in the West Mids. We have already started to see some really good results. So in the last few months, they've been operational in this hotspot since January. We have had 20 weapons recovered, which has started to already see that 80% reduction in knife crime victims, 60% reduction in serious youth violence. Now that's in that under 25 bracket that I spoke about earlier on. And we have started to see that cost of crime reduction of £360,744. But last but no means by least, we've started to safeguard some of the people and the young people in that area. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand back over now to Ben and Phoebe, who are going to do your demonstration.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to Kim and Tori for that excellent presentation on how West Midlands Police are using ArcGIS Pro to help support Operation Fearless. Some really impressive statistics at the end there about the reduction of crime that they've seen. And I think that really speaks to the power of spatial analysis, not just in identifying and understanding place-based problems, but also helping to guide and assess place-based solutions too. Now, for the second half of the session, Phoebe and I are going to take a closer look at some of those tools used by West Midlands Police in some of those workflows they've just talked about. For this demo, we're going to be taking a look at street-level crime data sourced from police.uk, and we're going to be specifically focusing on any theft-related crime within that data for the year between 2023 and 2024. We're going to run some analysis, tease out some hotspots and problem areas, and then we're going to look at automating that workflow using Model Builder. And finally, we're going to look at a custom Python script that's going to help push our analysis a little bit further. And hopefully throughout this, you'll be able to get a bit of an understanding into the geoprocessing environment of ArcGIS Pro. So to get started, first of all, I need to turn my rows and columns in a spreadsheet into points on a map. So for that, I'm now in ArcGIS Pro, and I'm going to use this XY table to point tool here to bring in my data. For the input table, I'm going to choose my CSV, which is the West Midlands crime data. And then for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to keep the rest of the parameters the same. But one thing I really want to point out is that our longitude and latitude fields, which are our locational data within that data set, have been automatically picked up in our X and Y field here. Now, if I hit run, this might take about 30 seconds or so to run, but it's going to use that locational data to plot our crime incidents across West Midlands. So there we go. You can see we now have points on a map. And as I mentioned earlier, we do just want to focus on theft-related crime within this data. So for that, I'm going to create a definition query by heading into our layer properties here, create a definition query, and I'm going to create a clause where crime type. So in our data, we have a field for types of crime, and I'm going to choose includes the values. And then here, I'm just going to select any theft-related crime. So we have things like bicycle theft, burglary, other theft, robbery, shoplifting, and theft from the person. I'm going to hit apply and then apply again. Now, it might not look too much different because there's quite a lot of data in that data set, but essentially it's just filtered out all of those other crime types. So when we run our analysis, we can make sure it's just focusing on theft. Now, just by adding this data to our map, we can gain a bit of contextual understanding. We can see where these crimes are happening, but at the minute, that's as far as it goes. So now I'm going to hand over to Phoebe, who's going to show how we can push that analysis a little bit further.
Great, thanks, Ben. So here we've got our theft-related crime across the West Midlands, and as you can see, there is a lot going on. We can't really identify any patterns, we can't see where there are hotspots of theft, so this is where spatial analysis really comes into fruition. So I'm going to run some spatial analysis, I'm going to do some geoprocessing to help us make more informed decisions. I'm going to run some tools that Tori and Kim have worked through and also show you some more tools to use for hotspot analysis. So in order to access the spatial analysis tools, I head over to the Analysis tab and open up the toolbox. The first tool that I'm going to run is called the Optimized Hotspot Analysis tool. And what this tool does is it's going to look at our incidences of theft and it's going to identify any statistically significant hotspots. Now, Tori's already mentioned this, but the statistic that underlies this tool is also the GI star statistic. I could do this for the whole of the West Midlands, but I want to focus down our analysis a little bit more. So I've imported a polygon of Greater Birmingham from the Living Atlas so that I can just identify hotspots within our Greater Birmingham area. Now that my data is ready, I can input some of the parameters in the tool. Our input features is our theft data set that we have just uploaded. I'm going to leave the output feature layer as it is. I have an option to choose an aggregation method, so I can aggregate our hotspots within a fishnet grid, a hexagon grid. I could choose different aggregation polygons such as LSOAs or wards. For the sake of this demo, I am just going to stick with a fishnet grid. And then I need to choose my bounding polygon. So as I mentioned, I only want to identify hotspots within Greater Birmingham, so I'm going to pick Greater Birmingham. Now I press run. It will take a few minutes, so in true Blue Peter style, I have ran one earlier. And if I open that up and zoom in a bit on Greater Birmingham, hopefully you can see that this tool has identified several statistically significant hotspots across Greater Birmingham. Using the legend on the left-hand side here, we can see that any of these darker red ones have a 99% confidence that they are statistically significant. Some of these hotspots we would expect. This large one in the centre is Birmingham city centre. There are more shops, there are more people, therefore there's more chance for things like theft to occur. However, the tool has also identified several other significant hotspots that weren't as obvious when just looking at that raw data set alone. One of particular interest is this one kind of in the top centre here, and that is because it falls within our boundary of Erdington. We've just heard about all the great work that is being done about knife crime in Erdington, so this is of particular interest. Let's have a bit of a deeper dive into the area of Erdington. So the first thing that I did is I took our larger theft data set and this ward boundary of Erdington in order to just look at the thefts within this area. Again, I can't tease out too many patterns and trends from this. I'm going to want to perform some spatial analysis. In order to help me with this, I have also imported the road network for Erdington from the Ordnance Survey National Geographic database. Now that I have all of my data, I'm going to run the AT20 analysis tool. So I've gone back to my geoprocessing toolbox and I'm going to search for that and bring this up. So the AT20 analysis tool, what it is doing is it's going to identify the roads where crime or theft in our case is disproportionately occurring. This tool is part of the crime analysis and safety toolbox, so it is really suited for this type of workflow. Again, I just need to input a few parameters. So I'm going to input our point feature dataset, being our thefts within Erdington. Our aggregation method, I'm going to change that to be the closest feature, and then choose my closest feature to be our road network. When I run this tool, what it's going to do, again, it will take a few minutes, so I've got one already up and ready, is it's going to create an output where the darker and thicker the line, that means that theft is disproportionately occurring in this area. Now, hopefully it's not too dark for those of you at the back, but if I zoom in, we can see that on Erdington, this is Erdington High Street, there are several segments of road and several roads which have been identified as disproportionately seeing more theft. Now, these results can help police officers make more informed decisions, such as more policing presence and some of the other methods that Tori mentioned. So I've carried out some spatial analysis and this workflow for the area of Erdington, but I might want to carry this out for a different area or for a completely different time period. So I'm going to pass back to Ben, who's going to show you how you could automate this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phoebe. So far, we've gone from rows and columns in a spreadsheet to points on a map, and then from points on a map to teasing out statistically significant clusters or hotspots of crime across Greater Birmingham. Now, the type of workflow that we've carried out here is one that you would typically repeat across, again, different areas or different time frames. And so obviously, we could go through and do that manually, as we've just done here, or we can actually automate that process using Model Builder within ArcGIS Pro. So that's what I'm going to do. So to get on with this, I'm going to open up the Model Builder tool, which is under the Analysis tab here. Now again, you could build up your model manually by dragging in your data and dragging in your tools and building it up that way. But because we've already gone through this workflow, what I can actually do is, again, head under the Analysis tab into our geoprocessing history, and then here we'll see these steps that we've taken out. So you can see our XY table to point, optimized hotspot analysis, and H20 analysis, and now I can just drag these into my model. It was very quick. I was about to say it might take 30 seconds to load, but it was pretty quick that time. And as you can see, what it's done is it's remembered how these tools have interacted with each other. So as you can see, we can have our West Midlands CSV that's been brought in using XY table to point, which is turned into our theft data. And then we're using that data against our geometries to then run these analysis, and then we have our outputs. So just like that, we have our multi-step workflow processed down into a single tool. But before we share this, we do want to tidy it up a bit. So the first step of this is I want to turn some of these nodes into parameters. And what that will do is allow users of the model to be able to define what goes into those parameters. So I want people to define, for example, which CSVs they load in. So I'm going to turn this into a parameter. I'd like them to be able to name the name of their outputs. So I'm going to turn that into a parameter. Same for our geographies. And then again, for all of these parameters here, I'd like people to be able to name them. The second part of this process is to then actually rename some of these nodes. So currently, these are named against the data. So when you're sharing it with other analysts, or if you're using the model yourself, get a bit confusing if every time it's called the same, West Midlands CSV. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right-click on this node. I'm going to click Rename. I'm going to rename this to something like Crime CSV. I'm going to do the same for my LSOA boundary, so I'm just going to call this something like Geography. And then same for Erdington Roads. Just call that Roads. And I'll call this Hotspot Output. Ooh. And I'm fairly happy with the name of Density Surface, so I'm going to keep that the same. But then finally, we're going to change our H20 analysis to something like H20 output. Cool. So there we have it. Now, if I hit save, I go back into the Model Builder tool, and then save our model here, and go into my catalog and into my toolbox. we'll see that we have our model, which has been created here. Now, if I open this, this model will look like any other tool that you use within ArcGIS Pro. So it'd be really useful if you, again, you want to share your workflow with other analysts which might not be familiar with all the steps. And again, they'd be able to put in their own data and parameters in there. And the other option you have is to actually export your model as a Python script. So if I head over to the little export button here, you can see that we can export it to a Python file. Now, what this means is that if you do have programming experience, you can get into things like creating your own custom scripts. It's also a good way to get an insight into the geoprocessing environment of ArcGIS Pro. So if I open up the Python window here, now I know for some of you looking at this, you might think, what on earth am I looking at here? But really what I want to point out is a lot of the tools that we use within ArcGIS Pro are just Python packages which are being called in. So here we have our XY table to point, and that's just being called into ArcGIS Pro as a Python package. And similarly, we have our hotspot analysis, and again, that's just a Python package being brought into ArcGIS Pro. So again, the implication of this is that if you do have coding experience, you can create your own custom Python packages to kind of expand that tool set if you are looking for a tool which doesn't come as part of a default toolbox within ArcGIS Pro. The other side to this is that even if you don't have coding experience, but you are looking for a tool that might not exist within a default toolbox of ArcGIS Pro, there are a whole host of custom Python scripts which are available as part of our industry solutions. So it's always worth just having a look at our industry solutions to see what there is there. And in fact, I'm now going to hand back over to Phoebe, who's going to take a closer look at a custom Python script as part of our crime problem management toolbox.
Great. So, as Ben mentioned, we have a whole host of different industry solutions, and one of those is the crime problem management solution. And as part of that, you get an example of one of these ready-made Python scripts that can be imported into ArcGIS Pro. So I open up the toolboxes within my Pro environment. Here I can see my industry solution, and again, if I expand that out, I have this Python script called weighted displacement difference. Now, all this is it's a Python script that I've downloaded, imported, and it's going to open up exactly like any other geoprocessing tool within ArcGIS Pro. Now, this tool is particularly useful in these kind of hotspot analysis scenarios, as what it's doing is it's going to identify whether there is evidence that a policing intervention, such as Operation Fearless, during a particular kind of specific time period has resulted in a reduction of crime when compared to a control area. So this is a really great tool. I'm going to run you through how it would work now, but I just wanted to highlight one thing, that this is a completely fabricated scenario. The data that I've got doesn't reflect a current policing intervention, so please do just bear that in mind. So I'm going to carry on using our target area of Erdington, as we have come to know and love this area. And I've randomly picked another ward within Greater Birmingham. So I've picked Edgbaston as our control area. Again, just to highlight, there is no policing intervention going on in these areas. So now when I run the tool, if I open up the tool, there are a couple of different parameters that I need to tell the tool in order for it to run. I need to tell it when our policing intervention started and finished. I need to tell the tool when are the crimes happening. And I also need to put in a displacement difference. And the displacement distance, this is the buffered area around the ward, so our target area, that is going to test for evidence of displacement. So has our policing intervention actually reduced crime, or has it just displaced it to other areas? So if I now input these parameters, I'm going to input our response area as Erdington, our control area is Edgbaston, and our input features is we're going to stick with our theft data set. Our start date, I have a field in our Erdington ward boundary, which tells the tool when the intervention started and also when it ended. And in our theft data set, there is a field which reports when the crime happened. I'm going to put in a displacement difference of 1 kilometre and then run the tool. So the tool is going to give us two different outputs. One is visual and one is a statistical output. The visual output is just telling us where's our control area, where's our response area, and where's our displacement area. But the real kind of value of this tool is in the messages. Again, I appreciate this is probably very small for those of you at the back, so I will read it out. But what this is saying is that this statistical test finds no evidence of reduction in the response area during the treatment period as compared to the control area. Now, we would expect this, as I mentioned, that there hasn't been an intervention in this data set. But you can imagine that the power of this tool, once Operation Fearless has been completed and they've got that data, when they rerun it with their own data, we would hope to see a statistical drop. So in this demo, we have taken you through how to turn Excel data into points on a map and then run some spatial analysis in order to uncover patterns. We've shown you how to automate this workflow using Model Builder and how that might help you share around your workflows with your colleagues. So this is all from us today, but if you do want a deeper dive into working with Python, our colleagues Will and Ender will be doing a session at 2:10 in this very room. And as mentioned at the start, if you have any questions for any of us speakers today, please just come to the front and we'd be more than happy to answer them. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass back to Murray.